Welcome, my dear friend, to the quiet haven of the night. The moon hangs like a pearl in the velvet sky, and the stars twinkle, whispering ancient secrets. Close your eyes. Let your breathing become as soft as a moth's wings, and imagine a time, long, long ago, when the world was much wilder and much, much bigger than it is today. In those days, the forests stretched further than any eye could see, and the mountains touched the very clouds. It was a world waiting to be shaped, a land of sprawling wilderness, and in that grand, untamed landscape lived a being unlike any other. His name was Paul Bunyan. Now, Paul wasn't born like other children. Oh no. When he arrived, it took 5 storks to carry him, and he was so big, his cradle was a lumber wagon. As a baby, his laugh echoed through the valleys like distant thunder, and when he cried, it brought on a full-blown hurricane. His parents, bless their hearts, had to build him a special floating cradle out in the ocean, just so his bedtime wails wouldn't shake the very foundations of the earth. But even then, the waves he created would crash against the shore, shaping the very coastlines we know today. As Paul grew, he grew not just in size, but in gentleness and strength. His hands were as big as barn doors, but they could also carefully cup a tiny bird. His strides could cover miles in a single step, yet he walked with a quiet reverence for the earth beneath his feet. His eyes, the color of the deepest forest pines, held a twinkle of good humor and a profound love for the land. But even Paul, mighty as he was, needed a companion, a best friend to share his adventures. And that, my dear listener, is where Babe comes in. Babe was no ordinary ox. He was a creature of legend, with fur the color of a summer sky just before dusk, a deep, comforting blue. Babe was found as a calf during the winter of the blue snow, a winter so cold that everything turned blue, even the snow. Paul found him shivering, just a tiny speck of blue against the vast white, and took him in. He carried Babe home in his giant pocket, warming him with his own great heart. Babe grew to be as magnificent as Paul, so big that a crow trying to fly from one of Babe's horns to the other would need to pack a lunch. His footsteps left impressions that would later become the countless small lakes that dot our landscapes. He was strong, loyal, and had a mischievous twinkle in his own blue eyes. Together, Paul and Babe, boy and ox, began their grand journey, wandering the untamed lands, shaping the world with every step, every swing of Paul's mighty axe, and every gentle nudge of Babe's broad head. Imagine them now, walking through the quiet forests, Paul with his enormous, comfortable boots making a soft thump-thump as he walked. Babe beside him, his hooves leaving deep, rhythmic imprints in the earth, the soft swish of his tail moving through the underbrush. The air would be filled with the scent of pine and damp earth, the rustle of leaves, and the distant hoot of an owl watching from a high branch. One day, Paul and Babe found themselves in a vast, flat expanse, miles and miles of untouched prairie. The sun beat down, and the land was dry, parched for water.
Babe, with his immense thirst, began to sniff the air, his long blue tongue lolling slightly. "Well, Babe, looks like we need some water, doesn't it?" Paul rumbled, his voice like a gentle roll of distant thunder. He looked around. There were no rivers, no lakes, just endless, flat ground. He scratched his head, a gesture that sometimes caused a small tremor in the earth. He thought for a moment, then his eyes lit up with an idea. "All right, old boy," he said to Babe, "let's make a river." Paul took out his mighty shovel, a shovel so large that its blade could cover a small farm. With a deep breath that made the trees around him sway, he plunged the shovel into the earth. Whoosh! A great furrow of soil flew into the air, landing miles away, forming the first gentle hills. He dug again and again, moving with a steady, rhythmic grace. Each scoop removed enough earth to fill 1,000 ordinary wagons. The ground trembled with his efforts, but it was a gentle tremor, a lullaby of creation. Babe walked beside him, his massive hooves pressing down the new riverbed, compacting the soil, shaping the banks. Paul worked through the day and into the night, guided by the light of the moon and the stars. The rhythmic thump-swish of his shovel, the soft clop-clop of Babe's broad head were the only sounds in the vast stillness. He dug so deeply, for so long, that the very water from the earth's heart began to well up, bubbling to the surface, filling the new channel.
Slowly, steadily, a river began to flow. It wound its way across the land, following the path Paul had carved, glistening like a silver ribbon under the moonlight. The water, clear and cool, burbled gently, a new voice in the silent landscape. And Babe drank deeply, his long gulps echoing softly in the night, quenching a thirst that had been building for ages. That river, my dear friend, became what we now call the mighty Mississippi, winding its way from the north to the sea, a testament to Paul and Babe's ingenuity and their simple need for a drink of water. As they followed the river south, they encountered a different kind of challenge: the weather. One year, a deep, biting cold settled over the land, unlike anything anyone had ever known. It was the winter of the blue snow, the same winter Babe was found. The air was so frigid that words froze in mid-air, falling to the ground like tiny icy pearls. The snow fell in drifts so high they covered the tallest pines, turning the world into a vast, silent, blue-white desert. The lumberjacks, hardy men though they were struggling. Their axes chipped against the frozen trees. Their beards grew long with icicles. Paul knew he had to do something. He thought about it, stroking Babe's warm blue hide. "Babe," he murmured, "we need to warm things up, but gently." Paul set to work. He decided to build the biggest campfire the world had ever seen. He gathered giant logs, each one bigger than a house, and stacked them carefully. But how to light it? He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, smooth river stone, warmed by his hand. He then found the biggest flint he could find, a mountain peak, in fact. With a mighty strike, sparks flew, igniting the massive pile of logs. The fire roared to life, a beacon in the blue world. Its heat radiated for miles around, melting the blue snow into gentle streams that trickled down to feed the new Mississippi. The lumberjacks cheered, thawing their frozen fingers. But Paul knew it wasn't enough.
the wind still howled. He took off his enormous mittens, made from the hides of 1,000 bears, and wrung them out. The water that poured from them formed the great lakes, huge, deep basins of fresh, clear water, warmed by the residual heat of his mittens. The steam rising from the lakes softened the air, creating a gentle fog that brought relief from the biting cold. And Babe, finding a patch of thawed earth, curled up, his blue breath creating soft, warm clouds that drifted over the camp, further easing the chill. The lumberjacks slept soundly that night, dreaming of spring, protected by Paul and Babe's warmth.
Life in Paul's logging camps was always full of marvels. Imagine the mornings. The cooks would be up before dawn, starting their preparations. But how do you cook breakfast for a crew of thousands of giant lumberjacks, men who ate enough to feed a small town? You needed something special. Paul invented the griddle. Not just any griddle, mind you, but a griddle so vast it took 20 men just to grease it, with slabs of bacon strapped to their feet, skating across its surface. The griddle was heated by roaring fires built underneath, fires tended by the bravest of the crew. On this griddle they'd make hotcakes, stacks and stacks of them, so tall they scraped the clouds. Paul himself would often flip them using a mighty spatula carved from a fallen redwood, sending them soaring into the air, spinning gracefully before landing perfectly on the serving plates. The smell of maple syrup and butter mingled with fresh pine would drift for miles, signaling the start of another hard-working day. And then there was Johnny Inkslinger, Paul's precise and clever bookkeeper. Johnny was no giant, but he was quick-witted and sharp. He used a fountain pen so big it was filled from a 50-gallon barrel of ink, and his ledger books were so enormous they had to be wheeled around by 2 oxen. Johnny recorded every log cut, every meal eaten, every penny spent, all in his neat looping script. Paul appreciated Johnny's meticulous nature, knowing that even in the wildest wilderness, order and a good count were important. One time, the camp faced a peculiar problem. The trees were growing so tall, their branches tangled with the clouds, making it hard to see the sun. And the land itself was getting too flat, too uniform. Paul looked at the vast green sea of trees stretching to the horizon. "Babe," he said, "this land needs a bit more character, a few more ups and downs." He considered it for a moment. He certainly couldn't just push the land around. That would be too messy. So he devised a plan. He took his axe, the one with a blade as wide as a riverboat, and began to chop. But instead of felling trees, he chopped into the ground, carefully, slowly. Each stroke carved out a new valley, a gentle dip in the earth. The soil he displaced, he carefully piled into soft, rolling hills. He moved with a steady, rhythmic swing, the sound of his axe thwack, thwack, thwack echoing softly across the landscape. The trees, instead of falling, seemed to gently settle into their new places, some finding themselves nestled in valleys, others standing tall on hilltops. The land began to undulate, to breathe, creating varied terrain perfect for new kinds of plants and animals. That, my dear friend, is how many of the gentle rolling hills and valleys we see today were formed, a testament to Paul's desire for a more interesting landscape.
As the years passed, Paul and Babe moved westward, following the frontier, making the land ready for those who would come after them. They crossed vast deserts, and Paul, with a simple flick of his wrist, would sometimes clear a path through a mountain range, creating a pass for pioneers. Or, if Babe got thirsty in the desert, Paul would simply tap his heel on the ground, and a spring of cool, fresh water would bubble up, creating a welcome oasis for travelers. One warm, lazy afternoon, Paul and Babe were resting by a newly formed lake, its surface shimmering like polished glass under the sun. The air was still, save for the gentle hum of bees and the distant call of a bird. Paul leaned back against a giant redwood, his hat, big as a small house, tipped over his eyes. Babe lay stretched out beside him, snoring softly, a sound like a gentle bass drum. Suddenly, a tiny, almost imperceptible sound reached Paul's ears, a faint buzz. Then another, and another. Soon the air was filled with a high-pitched whine. Giant mosquitoes! These weren't your ordinary annoying little insects. Oh no, these were mosquitoes as big as turkeys, with proboscises long enough to draw water from a deep well. They were a nuisance, bothering Babe and trying to land on Paul's head. He chuckled softly. "Well, Babe, looks like we have some company." He didn't want to hurt the creatures, but they were quite troublesome. He thought for a moment, then reached for a nearby pine tree. With a gentle twist, he pulled it from the ground, roots and all. He stripped off the branches, leaving a long, straight pole. Then, with a quick, deft movement, he flattened the top, turning it into a giant fly swatter. He didn't swing it to hit them, no. Instead, he gently waved it back and forth, creating a massive, swirling gust of wind. The mosquitoes, caught in the unexpected breeze, were swept up and carried far, far away to a distant, empty swamp where they could buzz and bite to their heart's content without bothering anyone. The air grew quiet again, save for the gentle lapping of the lake water against the shore. Paul put his pine tree swatter back, leaning it against the redwood, and went back to his nap, the satisfied smile playing on his lips.
Sometimes the world itself seemed to get a bit carried away. There was the time the weather went wild. One day a fierce blizzard blew in, but it wasn't snow that was falling. It was popcorn. A huge, fluffy, buttery popcorn blizzard. The sky turned white with kernels, hot and popping, showering down upon the land. The lumberjacks, initially startled, soon found themselves in a most delightful predicament. Imagine popcorn as far as the eye could see, piling up in drifts as high as houses. Some thought it was a giant snack. Others tried to figure out how it happened. Paul, ever the practical one, just smiled. "Well, looks like dinner's served," he boomed. He quickly set about gathering the popcorn. With his giant scoop, he filled up the valleys and hollows, creating vast, soft hills of fluffy white. The lumberjacks, delighted, jumped in, playing in the soft drifts, having the biggest food fight the world had ever known. Paul even managed to gather enough to make a popcorn ball so huge it could be seen from the moon, rolling it gently into a nearby canyon for later. The popcorn storm eventually subsided, leaving the land covered in a delicious buttery blanket, and the lumberjacks with full bellies and happy memories. As the years turned into decades, and the wild, untamed lands began to fill with towns and farms, Paul and Babe knew their time was coming to a gentle close. They had shaped the land, cleared the way, and made it ready for the settlers. Their work was done. They journeyed to the farthest reaches of the west, to the quiet mountains where the sun dipped below the horizon in a blaze of color. Here they found a vast, peaceful valley, untouched by human hands. Paul looked at Babe, his eyes full of love and contentment. "This looks like a good place for a long rest, old friend," he whispered. And so Paul and Babe settled down. Paul built a small, cozy cabin no bigger than a mountain for himself. Babe made his bed in a meadow that stretched for miles, the grass soft and green. They spent their days watching the clouds drift by, listening to the wind sigh through the pines, and observing the little creatures that scurried through the undergrowth.
Sometimes at night, when the moon was full and bright, Paul would tell Babe stories of their adventures, his voice a soft rumble that vibrated through the ground. He'd recount the creation of the Mississippi, the blue snow, the hot cake griddle, and the popcorn storm. Babe would listen, his gentle snorts echoing like soft drum beats, his blue eyes reflecting the starlight. The world grew quieter around them. The sounds of logging camps faded, replaced by the chirping of crickets and the croaking of frogs. The land they had shaped continued to thrive, the rivers flowing, the forests growing tall, the lakes shimmering under the sun. And sometimes, even today, if you're in a very quiet place, in the deep woods or by a lonely lake, you might hear a distant soft snore, like a gentle rhythmic hum in the earth. That, my dear, might just be Babe, dreaming of hot cakes and blue snow.
And if you ever see a particularly large, oddly shaped hill, or a perfectly round lake, or a river that seems to wind just a little bit too perfectly, remember Paul Bunyan and Babe. Remember their kindness, their strength, their love for the land, and their tireless, gentle work in shaping the world for us all. Now, as the stories of Paul and Babe gently fade into the quiet night, let your own thoughts drift away like clouds. Feel the softness of your bed, the warmth of your blankets. Your breath is calm and even, like the gentle current of a river Paul might have made. The stars are watching over you, just as Paul and Babe watched over the world. Close your eyes. Let the echoes of Paul's gentle laughter and Babe's soft snorts lull you into a peaceful slumber. Dream of vast open spaces, of blue oxen and giant kind men. Dream of adventures and the quiet satisfaction of a good day's work. The night is deep and rest calls to you. Sleep, sleep deeply, and may your dreams be as grand and as gentle as the tales of Paul Bunyan. Good night.